Hmm. I became involved in tech startups. That's an interesting question. Um, Kind of a windy road. My whole career path is a weird windy road. I started working for a tech company quite a while ago. Um, Before that, I had launched an organization called Young Professionals of Seattle. Through that work, naturally curious. I say the work with Young Professionals of Seattle being, naturally curious. Um, would continuously conduct surveys from people participating, individuals, and then companies that were looking to sponsor to try to figure out what was important, what was interesting, why do you want to sponsor, where do you expect your dollars to go through, like what are the results that you're looking for. In doing so, I found a couple of commonalities between companies that are looking to give money, to give dollars. A lot of them are around like marketing and or hiring, really in identifying a particular audience. And I mean, carving a path for spending and or employment for those audience members. Um, Now, with the young professional organization, I was very protective of the individuals who were willingly giving us their email addresses because they wanted to be included in any of the events
People
that
don't
we
realize
do.
how hard that is to get somebody's email address.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It takes work, but for me, I was like, okay, like, well, like they're signing up for this. They're not necessarily signing up for like this corporate integration
Mm.
necessarily, right? Like, but let's find out exactly like what they want. Like, if there's a way to kind of connect the dots with the companies, we will, right? So I realized that companies wanted to sponsor oftentimes. Like, I didn't necessarily see what the data, the information that we had through some surveying that like companies, their ambitions were a match for the needs of the individuals that are joining our organization. So we would at a certain point have to say no, sorry, like I don't know this is a good fit for this community that you're trying to reach, but I can help you create your own campaign to reach them on your own, right? If you're not going to do it through our brand, you can do it through your own brand. So while I was working at this tech company, it's a publicly traded company now. At the time, it wasn't. It was way smaller. I started pretty early there. Um, you know, Wore multiple hats there, but like while I was working at that company, I was doing a lot of work with companies, and without knowing it, I was consulting and advising on how to deliver, how to identify an audience member, how to deliver messaging, how to tailor a brand for the impact or the results that you're looking for from that audience, right? So I actually started getting hired to do that kind of work. So that's where like my consulting started. Same time, I mean, Seattle being a fairly tech heavy city, very, tech centric here. There were things like Startup Week, Startup Weekend that were happening throughout the community. I was, just interested in general, right? Just working in tech and working with a lot of companies, right? Like there were startups, relatively new tech companies in the Seattle area that were reaching out, trying to access young professionals of Seattle, network. Realizing that, like, I was consulting and advising you know, smaller companies, but also some more established companies. And that my advice had value. It was kind of interesting to me. So like I really started getting excited about more so helping the smaller companies grow, right? Like leveraging the work that I've done for some of the bigger companies and stuff, consulting and doing it to kind of create like, a larger impact for kind of the underdog, right? Like I'm always kind of a fan of the underdog. So I started getting involved in, things like, Seattle Startup Week. I started being connected with entrepreneurs in the city. I started just being referred, by my contacts that I picked up through a lot of that work to, these startups that were newly funded, that were looking to grow, like looking to identify an audience, looking to like generate revenue or create revenue models. So I was kind of, learning as I went, but realizing that like I had a skill set that I didn't go to school for. Um, that was relevant to the startup community. So again, like for me, I think being again kind of a fan of the underdog, right? Like that, like energetic new founder with a really good idea. That just maybe needed some guidance, advice, a little perspective that maybe they didn't have time or the network to provide for them. I could kind of jump in and do you know have the conversations that I knew well enough that became something I did on a recurring basis, right? Startups didn't really pay the bills. It was more of a hobby, right? But like, there were bigger companies that like, I would consult that actually had financial means to be able to pay, for the work that I did. So like, I found myself, working with startups as more of a hobby, right? Like something that I actually cared about, like something that I was more passionate about than the big companies. Big companies pay the bills.